I prefer to discuss the artful application of tactics and the philosophy behind warrior leadership. However, art and philosophy should never deny the science that is also inherent in tactics and in military science. Today I'm going to do something that's a little out of the ordinary for me, and I hope doesn't become too much of a a crutch here, but I do want to address some of the science involved, and that is the technological advantage that I spoke of in the single cartridge platoon video. There are other technological advantages that we need to, pay attention to. They merit their own discussion. One of the things I will caution you before we jump into this is to remember, I beg you remember, a technological advantage is always temporary. Yes, it's a force multiplier, and that's why they are so critically important, but they are always temporary. The enemy will either reverse engineer their own, purchase their own off the open market, or learn to mitigate yours. Never become too reliant on these, and yet at the same time take advantage of them while they're available. Up next, optics. I'm Dr. Christopher Larsen, a veteran of the U.S. Army Infantry, founder of One Shepherd Leadership Institute, and author of Small Unit Tactical Doctrine. Once again, optics are a force multiplier. Now, I'm not going to jump into rifle scopes. They've been around since, I think at least since the Civil War, and they merit their own discussion, and we'll do a video on that sometime at a later date. What I'm really talking about is something that's more recent in our arts and science, and that is night vision and things like red dot optics, okay? Night vision, active night vision, that is, active night vision means you're throwing out some kind of light, usually an IR light, so that it illuminates an area that seems dark to the naked human eye, but in fact to an optic, a night optic device, a NOD, it actually illuminates and it can see very well. So that's active night vision, which I think they were playing with back in the 1940s and certainly by the 1950s. You see passive night vision really come into its own during the Vietnam era, although it wasn't quite ubiquitous yet. That would come in the 1980s, and even I would say by the close of the 1980s, where virtually every soldier in a rifle company was issued night vision, some of them two. So night vision grows, and the one I have on my desk here is called a D300. It's a Gen 2 Plus, meaning it is a mil-spec tube that actually is refurbished from the U.S. Army PVS 5s. So this is a Gen 2 Plus, and it does very, very well in its use, but what you'll find is, number one, that each generation is superior to the past, and what that really means is that you're getting a better illuminated vision. The other thing is that they work in, if you can imagine, you say, this is the light capacity. This is very bright, this is very dark, whatever it is, and so you say Gen 2 works here. Well, you'd find that Gen 1 works in a more narrow bandwidth of available light, Gen 2, and then Gen 3. So Gen 3 isn't just giving you a better illuminated reticle or tube, it's giving you also a greater bandwidth. But if these became ubiquitous by the end of the 1980s, what's interesting is that red dot optics start in the 1970s, but truly come into their own and become ubiquitous from 2000 on. And they were used and are used in tandem, and you need to keep that in mind. I have just a couple of examples. There are 100 examples. From rather on the most expensive end, and I won't say the most, but it's ranging towards that, to one of the cheapest available and ranging towards that. But again, here I'm going to say that they're both just powerhouses. These are two excellent examples. This one is your Bushnell TRS-25, which broke on into the market, I think, 10 years ago and set the market on its head for such a reliable, albeit very simplistic, in what it achieves for you, but such a reliable and rugged red dot optic. And it was selling for a long time at well below the $50 mark, somewhere around $40 to $45. Again, a powerhouse. People swear by them, put them on everything. And then I borrowed from One Shepherd. What they have used for the last dozen or more years is the Trigicon Reflex. And so it's a tritium. It doesn't have a battery, where this has a battery with somewhere around 1,000 hours. I forget what that is, but let's say it's a year. About 1,000 hours of battery life. But that really depends on what setting you have. The dimmer setting is going to get 1,000. The higher, more powerful or better lit for the red dot setting, probably going to only get about half of that. It's still pretty substantial. The tritium has no battery, and also similarly has just a very simple dot. Doesn't do a whole lot for you, but incredibly rugged. And with the tritium in there, it lasts a good 10 to 12 years before you need to refurbish it. Both of these are just, again, very strong workhorse models. They come highly recommended. And then, of course, people say, well, do they actually work in tandem with the night vision? And that's going to depend on the quality of night vision that you have, not just the quality of the and the brightness of the dot inside of the each one of these sights or these optics. There's a little bit of playroom. What I'm saying is, I think officially the answer is no. This is too bright and this is too bright for night vision, even potentially Gen 2. However, the reality is something else. As this grows dimmer, say it's got a 12-year life, and as it grows dimmer over its 6th year, what we notice is that we very much could, meaning we, One Shepherd, very much could use this in tandem with Gen 2 nods. So yes, also at the lower settings, this could, depending on the type of nod you're using, could potentially be used in tandem as well. So, you've got some really cool technological advances here. You do want to take advantage of those, regardless of the fact that they are becoming so ubiquitous that you can now expect peer and near-peer militaries to have these. Nonetheless, fantastic. And another advantage of the red dot optics is target acquisition. In various tests, what we found over iron sights was that target acquisition was much quicker, particularly 200 meters and in. Particularly for 200 meters and in with a red dot than it was with iron sights. And so I think somewhere around 2010, the United States Army just kind of left iron sights behind and went purely to optics for basic training, School of the Infantry, and whatnot. They have since reversed that. They are now teaching, and I don't know if it's true in basic training, but I'm told back in the School of the Infantry and certainly some of their NCO courses, they're now teaching iron sights again. Why would they do that? Well, it gets to the disadvantages of these devices. Let's remember several things. First and foremost, they're electronic. Electronic does eventually burn out, whether it's the batteries or whatnot. And then there are counter-electronic measures that the enemy, that our opponents and antagonists will use against us. All right, so they will try to counter these measures. And there's various different ways. Yes, they can go after the power source. That's one way they can do it. All right, an EMP sort of attack. There are devices out there that use the glass optics to actually blind, temporary or permanently, the riflemen, the warriors who use these. And that's been around since the 1990s. So there are countermeasures to these you need to be aware of. And then there's the simple Mother Nature gets a vote. With glass optic, and all of these have glass optic, I have experienced this myself on numerous occasions. It's a rarity, but it happens. I'm in a torrential downpour, we're crawling through the mud, we get in an engagement, and we're trying to use these things, but they become just caked, soaked, no longer usable, which you'll notice, that's why we have quick detach on there, because we just tear these things right off. Yes, they're zeroed. Yes, we have to re-zero them afterwards. But in that moment, you don't need a blockage. You need to be able to see your enemy through sights, and we go back to the iron sights. Well, how do you go back to an iron sight? if you've never trained on that. And so I think the United States Army became aware of that, perhaps the Marines as well, and they now train on iron sights. And if that doesn't really sell you, if you say, well, I'm not sure I buy into all that, then I will say this, that if you look at a U.S. military protractor, that helps you with map reading, it comes with this little warning on it that says, learn map reading and protractor and compass, because your GPS is an electronic device. It can be jammed, it can be blocked intentionally by enemy countermeasures, but it also loses its effectiveness and is even rendered useless in steep canyons, in the middle of a big city with high skyscrapers, in very harsh and inclement weather. There are all these natural phenomenon that defeat a GPS as well, and this is why the military still to this day teaches the age-old map, compass, and protractor. What is that, 1,400 years old, that technology? Yet we still teach it. Likewise, we should hold dear our skills with iron sights. So, force multipliers, fantastic. I highly recommend them. Use them, train with them, get used to them, but don't forget your iron sights.